Hi Geekscapists, Tessa Markle back, one half of the team at Femme Regard podcast, which is a show on the Geekscape network all about independent filmmaking. And I'm here to talk to you today about the movie Adventureland. Why, you ask? Well, because it was released on April 3rd, 2009, so we're coming up on an anniversary, and it's a movie that is near and dear to my heart. There's one reason I'll tell you later, but another reason is that it was filmed in Kennywood. Now, for anyone that's not from the southwestern Pennsylvania region, Kennywood is an amusement park in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and it's probably the best one in the tri-state area. I mean, you know, we've got like Cedar Point with the exciting rides and stuff, but Kennywood has the nostalgia that you're not gonna get anywhere else. I mean, this amusement park is over 100 years old. They have the best French fries anywhere. Some of the scariest rides, some of them are pretty rickety, I'm gonna say that, but it's a great time, you know, and it's such a Pittsburgh staple. I mean, we have a saying, for instance, when people's fly is down, that Kennywood's open. Like, we love it. So you can only imagine how excited Pittsburgh was when they decided to film here. Even though Pittsburgh has become a pretty major film hub in the past 10 years or so, this was one of the first. Dark Knight Rises was another early one for us, and now you're seeing stuff filmed in Pittsburgh all the time. I know a lot of friends of mine have a career in film here in Pittsburgh, but yeah, this is some pretty exciting news for us. But I'll stop, you know, fangirling all about Kennywood, and we're gonna get into more about it later, but let's talk about the movie itself. So if you haven't seen it, I'll try not to spoil it for you, but it's set in the summer of 1987, where recent college grad James Brennan, played by Jesse Eisenberg, is making big plans to tour Europe and attending graduate school in pursuit of a career in journalism. However, financial problems force him to look for a summer job instead of traveling abroad, which places him at Adventureland, a rundown amusement park in western Pennsylvania, where he meets Emily Lewin, who's played by Kristen Stewart, a co-worker with whom he develops a quick rapport and relationship. So that gives you a quick little rundown. We've also got Ryan Reynolds as one of the major characters, and I'll be honest with you, back in 2009, I'm not sure if I even knew who Jesse Eisenberg, Kristen Stewart, and Ryan Reynolds were. I mean, not that they weren't already stars, but they were semi early on in their careers, really. It's just such a feel-good movie about coming of age, but told in a different way. You know, and I say told in a different way because, first of all, the coming of age, you know, they're already like right out of college. A lot of coming of age is told in high school, you know, so they're adults, but barely. And the feel-good aspect of it, it's so relatable and does have a happy ending, but it's also realistic. You know, they don't just skirt away from the issues. And even though it is a happy ending, it's really not all tied up in a bow. So if you haven't seen it yet, first of all, highly recommend. But let's get into more of it. So Adventureland was inspired by director Greg Matola's own experiences. Yes, he worked in an amusement park for a summer, and yes, he hated it, but yes, he had a lot of personal growth and experiences to go along with it. The real Adventureland park, which the movie is based on, is located in Farmingdale, Long Island in New York. But of course, our Adventureland was filmed in Pittsburgh in late 2007. Most of the scenes, all of the ones that were shot in the amusement park itself, were in Kennywood, which is a historic amusement park in nearby West Mifflin, so technically right outside of Pittsburgh, but we claim it as our own. And the park, I thought this was pretty funny, was heavily altered to look run down. Kennywood is 126 years old, and some of the original rides are still there. There's one called the Jackrabbit that is the most rickety roller coaster I have ever been on in my life, and somehow I still feel safe. There was an incident maybe like 10 or 15 years ago where one of the rides did break, probably because it was so old. It was the whip, which is one that just kind of whips you around in a circle, and yeah, that was not a great story. That did not end well, I'll be honest. But there's some other classic rides. We've got Noah's Ark, which it's not a ride, it's more of like a fun house that you walk through. And let me tell you, the things in there, like the mannequins and the animals, look like they're 126 years old. There's also the Old Mill, which is one of those like lovers boat ride kind of things that was eventually turned into Garfield's Nightmare, which is a psychedelic ride from hell. Very creepy, but another classic. I can only imagine what has happened in there in the past 100 years. But again, I told you, I'm not going to fangirl about Kennywood too much. We're here to talk about the movie. So the story takes place during the summer, but since it was shot in the winter months in Pittsburgh, crews had to often hide snowfall. In some instances, during indoor takes, extras were paid to stand outside surrounding the windows and doors to block the snow falling behind the actors. I think this is hilarious because in the movie, you would never know. I mean, it looks like it's summertime, but if you are not from southwestern Pennsylvania, it can be very sunny and still very cold. Today, I think it's about 45 degrees and it looks like it's 80. And this is from a girl that's coming from Southern California home for a visit, okay? So they did a really good job tricking the audience into thinking that it was summertime by just hiding what little snow they could. I do remember, all right, I'll reveal the secret of the other reason why I love Adventureland is that I was actually an extra in the movie. It was my first time on a professional movie set. And I remember it being quite cold and rainy. I don't actually remember snow. Yeah, it was definitely wintertime when that was happening. And I do remember rain being an issue a few times. I was only on set 1 or 2 days, but yeah, you look up at the clouds and you can tell it's not a bright sunny day in the summertime. Kristen Wiig and Bill Hader, who are also two of the main characters in the film, were only on set for a total of 4 days. All scenes with their characters, Paulette and Bobby, had to be condensed and shot quickly due to their commitments to Saturday Night Live, which is kind of madness because they're in a lot of scenes. They're in a lot of the movie. And as a filmmaker myself, I understand what it's like to try to shoot stuff as fast as you can because you only have a certain amount of time, a certain budget, people's schedules, whatever it is. But, you know, on professional movie sets, you usually have a little more wiggle room. So you're usually doing a lot more takes. You're getting a lot more coverage. That all takes a long time. I really do not know how they managed to squeeze all of that into 4 days, to be honest with you. A total of 41 songs were licensed for use in the film, but only 14 made the film's accompanying soundtrack, which I found surprising because, you know, the characters in the movie, they're young adults. They love music, you know, and again, being like that coming of age summer movie, like it's all about the soundtrack, right? You know, taking place in the 80s, there was a lot of that nostalgic music. I'm gonna say nostalgic and not oldies because I don't need to feel any older. In the early versions of the script, the musician idolized by James, Jesse Eisenberg's character, and many of the surrounding characters was actually Neil Young, which I found interesting. Originally, it was written that Connell, played by Ryan Reynolds, had played alongside Young and was idolized by the characters. The musician was eventually replaced with Lou Reed, the late singer of the Velvet Underground. I thought this was interesting mostly because they ended up using a lot more Lou Reed and Velvet Underground music in the soundtrack, which I think fit it so much better. Like, I can't imagine, you know, rocking in the free world or something in the places where these like sweet little heartfelt songs are. As I mentioned, this was the first movie that I was an extra in. I was able to get that through Nancy Mosser Casting, through a friend of mine that was working for the casting department. And it was certainly interesting. Like I said, I was only on set for a couple of days, but that was my first time. So it was my first time, you know, being around A-list actors, being around professional movie makers, and seeing what really goes into it. And the biggest thing I took away was it's a whole lot of sitting around, hurry up and wait, and then anticipating seeing yourself in the movie when it's finished and out and not being able to spot yourself. So if you've never done background acting, let me just warn you, that's what it's like. However, I did have some fun times on set. I made friends and I ended up in a couple of scenes. There's a couple scenes in the arcade that I'm in the background of, as well as the scene where you see the ride, the Music Express, going in the background. So one of the characters, she works on the Music Express. Like, that's her ride, that's her job, right? So it's mentioned and you see it several times, but there's only one time when you really like see it going with people on it. I had to have ridden that ride 50 times, I swear, because we had rehearsals, we had takes, we had multiple different shots and coverage, and oh my God. If you don't know what the Music Express is, imagine everybody's in their own little car and it just goes around in a circle, kind of like dips up and down, but it's really just a circle over and over and over and over. And I love spinny rides. Like, it doesn't make me sick or anything like that. So that was one of my favorite rides. So I was kind of excited that that's, what it got to be. Only roller coasters I don't like are when they hold you upside down. So if I would have been on that one, I would have had to quit, seriously. But we're riding this ride over and over and over. And the song Rock Me Amadeus by Falco, I believe that's how you say the band, was what was playing in the background. And, they even make references to this in the movie of how often that song is played. One of the characters even says, like, they play that song 20 times a day, fucking sadists. I felt exactly the same after that. When I rewatched the movie in preparation to make this video, I couldn't get it out of my head for like 3 days. Fun song, but when you hear it like 50 times while you're spinning in a circle, it gets to be a little too much. Anyway, I think this movie is the perfect example of your awkwardness in your late teens and early 20s, I mean, Eisenberg and Stewart are like the most awkward yet genuine actors I know. So they were cast perfectly for this. And I think that, they're both, as awkward as they are, they've got a really lovely touch of subtlety to their acting, and it really felt heartfelt. I know a lot of people around that time were, giving Kristen Stewart some crap for doing Twilight, and I think this movie really got to show off her talents. I think she did a really fantastic job. And I think it really encapsulates how awkward we all were at that age. I think that's why it's so relatable. And there's so many different characters in this movie too. Like, you've got the popular girl, you've got the really nerdy guy, you've got that annoying guy, you've got your main characters, you've got the hot older dude. Like, you've got a little bit of everything. So everyone has someone to relate to, and everyone knows someone that is exactly one of those other characters. And it really, it concentrates on young adults navigating relationships and sexuality, combined with parental issues and jealousy, which I feel like not all coming of age stories really realistically touch upon all of those things. And again, I don't want to spoil it, so close your ears for a second if you haven't seen it. But in the beginning of the film, Eisenberg's family loses everything. They went from these rich people to they can't even afford to send him to school, let alone to Europe for a vacation, and have to move to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So, I think now we get a lot more movies that are just real about that kind of stuff. They're not afraid to talk about it. But back then that was still a relatively new concept. And I think the movie does a great job at having a happy ending for the hero couple while still not just, letting everything work out, tying it with a bow. While it ends happy for them, we see the other characters, okay, it's not a tragic ending for them, but there's nothing great going on for them, Everything works out, but it's not perfect. And that's how life is. I think this movie especially hits home for kids who grew up around Pittsburgh or southwestern Pennsylvania or any place like it. It's not the hip, bustling city that it is today. Certainly, even back then, let alone in the 80s, it was a coal mining town. It was blue collar. And a lot of the surrounding Pittsburgh area was very poor. Growing up here wasn't necessarily a joy. And personally, I grew up at a better time than the 80s in the Pittsburgh area, but you feel stuck in a place like that sometimes. Small town, even if it's a big city. And while I love coming home to visit now, it's really easy to feel like there's nothing else or it's not going to get any better. So I think, like I said, a lot of kids that grew up around this area can really relate to that. But I think the movie also holds up today, regardless of where you're from, because the themes are timeless. It's a great coming of age movie for young adults who feel like they've already come of age, but have nowhere to go or don't know what's next, So I think it's a relatable movie. I think it's a super fun movie. I had a great time the couple of days that I spent on set. And let me tell you, upon rewatching, I'm yearning for a Kennywood day. Thanks, guys. Again, I'm Tessa Markle from Femme Regard podcast. If you haven't listened to our show yet, check it out on the Geekscape Network. We talk about all things independent film, and you can follow us at Femme Regard.